This wasn't random noise. The patterns clearly suggested structured military communication, with timing that preceded American attacks and frequency usage that matched Marine Corps protocols. Yet, the language itself was impenetrable, unlike anything in their extensive intelligence files. These were the men who had broken American diplomatic traffic and British naval communications, the masterminds who had provided Japan with crucial intelligence for years. But this was different. This was complete cryptographic failure. What Kurohara didn't know, what no Japanese intelligence officer would understand until after the war, was that he was listening to the only unbroken code in modern military history. Commander Kurohara's frustration was so profound because his organization, the Otta facility, was one of the most sophisticated signals intelligence operations in the world. This was not an agency accustomed to failure. On the contrary, his cryptanalysts had a stunning track record of success, having broken American diplomatic traffic, British naval communications, and multiple army codes. Long before the attack on Pearl Harbor, they had penetrated the State Department's highly secure Purple Code, providing Japan with crucial intelligence throughout the early years of the war. For them, deciphering enemy secrets was routine. Their past victories made their current failure all the more significant. This wasn't a case of incompetence. These were the best minds Japan had. Their utter inability to make even the slightest progress proved they were facing something that operated on a completely different level, a puzzle whose pieces weren't just scrambled, but seemed to be from another dimension entirely. The cryptographic wall that had stopped Japan's best minds cold was not built of mathematics or machinery. It was something far older, more complex, and more human, the Navajo language, or Diné bizaad. For centuries, this language had been preserved in the American Southwest, spoken by approximately 170,000 people in 1940, almost entirely within the confines of their vast reservation. This isolation created a linguistic fortress whose defensive features had evolved over millennia. Unlike English, Navajo is a fundamentally verb-centered language, where actions are described through a dizzying number of complex prefix combinations that can run into the millions. It is also a tonal language, employing four distinct tones: high, low, rising, and falling, that completely alter a word's meaning. A slight mispronunciation doesn't just create an accent, it can render an entire sentence incomprehensible. But its greatest defense was its sound. The language is filled with phonemes absent from Japanese, English, and most world languages. Ejective stops where air explodes from the glottis, a voiceless lateral fricative that sounds like wind blowing through teeth, and a host of glottalized and nasalized vowels. For Japanese cryptanalysts, trained in a language with just 5 simple vowel sounds, even accurately hearing these sounds, let alone deciphering them, was a virtual impossibility. A linguistic fortress is useless if no one recognizes its military potential. The man who saw a weapon in the ancient sounds of the Navajo was not a general or a codebreaker, but a civilian engineer named Philip Johnston. Born in 1892 to a missionary on the Navajo reservation, Johnston grew up with the language as his own, making him one of fewer than 30 non-Navajos worldwide who could claim fluency. By age 9, he was translating his father's sermons. By 15, he was in Washington, D.C., translating for Navajo leaders in a meeting with President Theodore Roosevelt. In the aftermath of Pearl Harbor, Johnston read a story about the Army using Comanche speakers during training exercises in Louisiana. He knew the concept had precedent. The Choctaw had served in World War I, but those efforts were limited and improvised. Johnston envisioned something far grander and more revolutionary, a formal, structured military code built on the unbreakable foundation of the Navajo language that would be both fast and practical for the brutal pace of modern warfare. His unique life experience had given him an idea that could change the course of the war. On February 28, 1942, Johnston presented his proposal not just with words, but with a live demonstration for Major General Clayton Vogel at Camp Elliott near San Diego. The event was remarkable, for Navajos from Los Angeles transmitted complex messages, while skeptical Marine officers timed them against their standard procedures. The result was staggering. The Navajo speakers could send, receive, and translate a 3-line message in a mere 20 seconds. In stark contrast, the military's M209 cipher machine, a sophisticated piece of equipment, took a full 30 minutes to complete the same task. In combat, that time difference was not just an advantage, it was the difference between life and death. The proof was undeniable and overwhelming. General Vogel was convinced on the spot and immediately authorized a pilot program to recruit the first Navajo Code Talkers. With General Vogel's authorization, the call went out across the vast Navajo nation. On May 4, 1942, the first group of 29 recruits, including men like Chester Nez, Carl Gorman, and Lloyd Oliver, were sworn in at Fort Wingate, New Mexico. They came from all walks of life. Some were traditional sheep herders who had rarely left their ancestral lands, while others had attended federal boarding schools. Herein lies the story's profound and bitter irony. For many of these young men, their childhoods were marked by the trauma of these government schools, where they were forbidden from speaking their native tongue and punished severely if they did. The very language that had been beaten out of them, the mother tongue they were told was a sign of being primitive and uncivilized, was now desperately needed by the nation that had tried to eradicate it. Setting aside a lifetime of persecution, these 29 patriots stepped forward, ready to transform the sacred language of their people into a weapon of war. At Camp Elliott, the 29 men were led into a locked, guarded building. For the next 8 weeks, this room would be their entire world as they undertook a monumental task to build a military code from the sounds of their native language. The challenge was immense, as they had to develop terminology for modern military concepts that had no equivalent in the Navajo worldview. They built the code through a powerful cultural logic. A submarine, a machine that swims beneath the water, became Besto, the iron fish. A massive battleship was dubbed Lotso, the whale, the largest creature in the ocean. Bombers were Sho, the Navajo word for buzzards, which circle high above before descending on their target, while nimble fighter planes were Dehitaihi, or hummingbirds. For words that couldn't be represented by a metaphor, they created a phonetic alphabet, but with a brilliant twist to defeat frequency analysis. Instead of one Navajo word for each English letter, they assigned multiple words to the most common letters. The letter E, for example, could be transmitted by saying days, elk, Anna, I, or Aya, ear. The code talkers would alternate between these options, making any discernible pattern impossible for the enemy to find. They developed an initial vocabulary of 211 terms, and every single one had to be memorized to perfection. No code books could be carried into battle where they could risk capture. As Chester Nez recalled, we drilled endlessly. A mistake could cost lives. In our culture, words have power. Speaking correctly was sacred. The drills were over. In August 1942, the code's first true test came in the blood-soaked jungles of Guadalcanal, where 15 code talkers landed with the 1st Marine Division. The Japanese had anticipated the invasion, having decoded other Allied communications, but the moment the Marines hit the beach, their intelligence advantage vanished. At the 8th Fleet headquarters in Rabaul, intelligence officers scrambled as Marine tactical messages suddenly became an incomprehensible stream of alien sounds. The code's life-saving impact was immediate and devastating. On November 8, 1942, as Marines were pinned down by a Japanese machine gun nest, code talker Chester Nez transmitted a call for artillery support. The entire message, containing the precise coordinates of the enemy position, took just 14 seconds to send. To the Japanese operators who intercepted it, the transmission was meaningless noise. But to the Marine artillery, it was a death sentence. Within minutes, American shells rained down with pinpoint accuracy, silencing the machine gun nest forever. The code was no longer a theory, it was a proven weapon. As Japanese intelligence grew more desperate, they turned to what they believed was their secret weapon, a captured Navajo soldier named Joe Kai-Waimea. Taken prisoner at Bataan in April 1942, Kai-Waimea was fluent in his native language but had been captured long before the code was ever created. At an interrogation center, cryptographers played him the recordings, hoping for a breakthrough. Kai-Waimea heard familiar words, but in bizarre, nonsensical combinations. The turtle is attacking the iron fish. The hummingbird carries eggs. When he truthfully explained that he couldn't understand the military meaning, his captors accused him of lying. The torture that followed was systematic and brutal. He endured waterboarding, severe beatings, and was hung by his arms for hours on end. In the winter, they forced him to stand naked in the snow until his feet froze to the ground. Starved down to just 90 pounds, he could only repeat the truth. He understood the words, but not their meaning. Through his unimaginable suffering, Kai-Waimea unwittingly provided the ultimate proof of the code's security. A Japanese intelligence report concluded that the enemy must be using a specialized code within the native language, requiring specific training. Joe Kai-Waimea survived, and his harrowing ordeal became the final, unbreakable seal on the code's secrecy. The success at Guadalcanal was not a secret within the Marine Corps. Word spread like wildfire up the chain of command, and the demand for more code talkers became immediate. Major General Alexander Vandergrift, commander of the 1st Marine Division, wrote a glowing report declaring, "The Navajo communicators have proven invaluable. Their transmissions are faster than any encoding device and absolutely secure." This high-level endorsement transformed the experimental program into an official military asset. A formal code talker school was established at Camp Pendleton, processing new classes of recruits every 8 weeks. What had begun with just 29 men now swelled in size and importance. By the war's end, between 375 and 420 Navajo Marines would serve as code talkers across all 6 Marine divisions. The pilot program was now a full-blown military institution, a linguistic arsenal that was about to be deployed across the entire Pacific theater. Faced with this expanding threat, Japanese intelligence escalated its efforts from mere analysis analysis to a formal, high-level hunt. The Imperial Navy's 4th Section assigned 30 of its best cryptanalysts to work exclusively on the Navajo transmissions. Led by innovators like Captain Yoshiro Tanaka, they deployed every technical weapon in their arsenal. They used special recording equipment to slow down the messages without distorting their pitch and created visual sound representations with oscilloscopes to search for patterns. They consulted university linguists and even scholars who had studied in America. Despite these sophisticated efforts, they gained almost no ground. They could identify probable call signs and correlate message length with operational complexity, but the words themselves remained a mystery. In their desperation, their strategy shifted from analytical to brutal. A direct order was issued to all Japanese forces: capture marine communication personnel alive. A reward of 10,000 yen, a full 10 years' salary, was offered for anyone who could deliver a code talker or their equipment. Every transmission was now a tightrope walk, as the code talkers operated with the knowledge that the enemy was not just listening, but actively hunting them. Despite the price on their heads, the code talkers operated with unmatched bravery in some of the war's most brutal campaigns. At the Battle of Tarawa in November 1943, 6 code talkers maintained communications through 76 hours of relentless combat. One of them, Lloyd Oliver, transmitted continuously for 48 hours straight, coordinating devastating naval gunfire on enemy positions, all while under constant shelling himself. During the Marianas Campaign, the code's strategic importance became even clearer. At Saipan, Japanese intelligence had successfully decoded conventional Allied communications to anticipate the invasion. But once the 24 code talkers on the island began operating, that advantage was instantly nullified. All tactical intelligence disappeared into the Unbreakable Navajo Code, leaving Japanese commanders like Colonel Takashi Saito to note that his forces felt completely abandoned, fighting blind without the intelligence they had come to depend upon. In the inferno of the Pacific, the calm, steady voices of the Navajo were a lifeline of clarity, delivering victory from the jaws of chaos. All the battles that came before Guadalcanal, Tarawa, Saipan were a prelude. The code talkers' ultimate test and their greatest contribution to the war would come on the black volcanic sands of Iwo Jima. The Japanese commander, General Tadamaki Kurabayashi, had spent 2 years turning the island into a fortress with 11 miles of interconnected tunnel. His entire defensive plan relied on one critical element: intercepting American communications to perfectly time his counterattacks. That plan failed completely. For the critical first 48 hours of the invasion, Major Howard Connor, the 5th Marine Division's signal officer, directed the entire operation exclusively through Navajo code. 6 code talkers, working in non-stop rotating teams, became the nerve center of the assault. In those 2 days, under constant fire, they sent and received over 800 messages without a single error. They coordinated the landing of 30,000 Marines, naval gunfire from 100 ships, close air support, medical evacuations, and tactical orders. An artillery request that took them 20 seconds would have taken 30 minutes with conventional machines, the difference between victory and annihilation. Major Connor, the man who witnessed their performance firsthand, later testified with a statement that leaves no doubt about their importance. His assessment was unequivocal. Were it not for the Navajos, the Marines would never have taken Iwo Jima. Following the triumph at Iwo Jima, the code talkers faced their last great challenge in the Pacific's largest assault, the 82-day battle for Okinawa. Here, Japanese forces, in a final act of desperation, even attempted voice mimicry to disrupt the network. The effort was a complete failure. According to code talker Alfred Newman, the enemy's attempts to reproduce Navajo's complex tones sounded simply like someone gurgling while trying to talk. The code remained unbroken to the very end. On August 14, 1945, code talker Teddy Draper was given the war's most significant message to transmit. He keyed his microphone and spoke the Navajo words, Nihima idijini adenil, Japanese surrender. In a moment of profound symbolic victory, the news that officially ended World War II was heard first in the sacred language of the Diné before it was relayed through any other channel. The secret weapon had delivered the final word. The war was over, but for the code talkers, a new silent war had just begun. Their mission was deemed such a critical strategic asset that the program remained classified, a secret weapon held in reserve for a potential conflict with the Soviet Union. The men were ordered to maintain absolute silence about their role. They returned home as heroes who could never reveal their heroism, carrying a burden that was both invisible and immensely heavy. The irony was crushing. These men had fought for a country that still refused to see them as equals. They returned to states where they were denied the right to vote vote, until 1948 in New Mexico and Arizona, and as late as 1957 in Utah. Hotels and restaurants where they were now refused service had hung signs during the war declaring no dogs or Indians allowed. They couldn't explain their combat trauma or their pride to their families, who only knew they had been Marines. As Chester Nez, the last of the original 29, wrote, "We were warriors who helped win the war but couldn't tell anyone." The burden was heavy. Unable to seek solace from the outside world, many found healing through traditional Navajo ceremonies, using the sacred power of their language not for war, but to purify themselves from it. For more than 2 decades, their story remained a secret, locked away in classified government files. But finally, in 1968, the Code Talker program was declassified and the long journey toward public recognition began. The first acknowledgement came in 1969 at a 4th Marine Division reunion, a quiet honor from their brothers in arms. Then, in 1982, President Ronald Reagan formally declared August 14th as National Navajo Code Talkers Day. But the pinnacle of recognition, the nation's highest civilian honor, came on July 26, 2001. In a ceremony at the Capitol Rotunda, President George W. Bush presented the Congressional Gold Medal to the original 29 Code Talkers. In a bittersweet moment that underscored the long delay, only 5 of the original men were still alive to receive the award. Standing before them, President Bush declared, "Today we honor 29 Native Americans who gave their country a service only they could give. After a lifetime of silence, the debt had finally been acknowledged in the heart of the nation they fought so hard to protect." The honors bestowed upon the Navajo shed light on a broader, often overlooked history of service. While the Navajo are the most famous, they were not alone. 14 other tribes provided code talkers for the U.S. military. The Choctaw pioneered the concept in World War I, and in World War II, 17 Comanche code talkers landed at Diné, while Hopi, Cherokee, and Lakota speakers also served. This shared legacy delivered a powerful message that transcended the battlefield. As code talker John Brown Jr. observed, "They told us our language was no good. Then they needed it to win the war." Their success was the ultimate refutation of the long-held, ignorant belief that indigenous languages were primitive. They proved that these were incredibly complex and dynamic linguistic systems, capable of expressing everything from sacred ceremonies to modern warfare. The Code Talkers demonstrated that their languages were not relics to be stored in a museum, but living, invaluable resources of immense sophistication and power. In the end, Japan's failure was not one of technology, but of imagination. Post-war analysis by their own intelligence officers, like Major Hiroshi Tanaka, revealed a fundamental blindness. They had prepared to fight America's industrial might and its mathematical codes, but they had never prepared to fight its diversity. The empire that proclaimed its own racial superiority was partly defeated by the very cultures and languages it couldn't comprehend. Here lies the story's ultimate powerful lesson. The language that American boarding schools had tried to eliminate became the key to victory in the Pacific. The Navajo Code Talkers proved that a nation's greatest strength isn't just its industrial capacity, but the rich, human variety of its people. They proved that America's greatest encryption, its truly unbreakable code, is diversity itself. It is a code that emerges from limitless human experience and wisdom, a transcendent message that differences are not weaknesses, but strengths to be celebrated, preserved, and deployed for the cause of freedom.